Yeah, I'm just here alone. Why do you keep asking me if I'm alone?
At the head of a very long dinner table, in a house that cost more than most people make in a lifetime, my father-in-law slid a stapled document across the linen toward me and said, "Sign it, son. We all know you married Rebecca for the money. This just protects the family from people like you." And every head at that table turned to watch the broke gold digger squirm. So I picked up the pen, and I signed it, and I smiled the whole time, because there were two things nobody at that table knew. The first was who actually had the money in my marriage. And the second, the one that still makes me laugh, was that in their rush to humiliate me, not one of those people had actually read the document they were so proud of. They never checked my name. My name is Daniel Cross. I'm 50 years old. I'm going to tell you a story about being underestimated and about the particular kind of quiet you learn when you decide to let people believe exactly what they want to believe about you. It's a lesson that took me a long time to learn, and it never paid off more spectacularly than it did at that dinner table, the night my wife's family handed me a postnuptial agreement and dared me to sign it. I've thought about that night 100 times since, and the strangest part is that I'm almost grateful for it. It handed me, in one clean moment, the answer to a question I've been quietly asking for 2 years. Who are these people, really, when they think there's nothing to gain from me? Now I knew, and knowing, it turns out, is worth more than any apology. Let me tell you who I actually am, because it matters. I run a company, a boring, invisible, wildly profitable company that makes specialized components for the medical device industry. You've never heard of it. That's on purpose. I own it outright. I built it over 25 years, and it has made me the kind of wealthy that doesn't announce itself. I don't post about it. I drive a 10-year-old car I like. I wear the same 3 jackets. I have never in my life felt the need to look rich, because I learned early that the people most desperate to look rich are usually the ones running out of the real thing. I came from nothing, which is the whole reason I am this way. I grew up watching my father work 2 jobs and still lie awake over the mortgage, and I promised myself that if I ever got money, it would be a fortress, not a costume. Real security, the kind you can't see, the kind nobody can take a run at because they don't even know it's there. So when the company took off, I didn't buy the boat or the watch or the second house on the water. I bought quiet. I bought the freedom to walk into any room and owe no one an impression. It's the best thing money ever bought me, and it cost almost nothing, and hardly anyone I know understands why I'd want it. The Whitfields certainly never did. The Whitfields, my wife's family, are the opposite kind of rich, the kind you can see from space. Before I tell you about them, do me one small kindness. If you've ever been judged by people who assumed they had you all figured out, tap subscribe. It's free, and it tells me this story found the right person. And stay to the end, because I'm going to ask you something I still wonder about, and I want to hear how you'd have played it. I met Rebecca 4 years ago. She's the one genuinely good thing that ever came out of the Whitfield family, and I think she'd tell you the same. We met at a charity thing I'd been dragged to, and she wasn't like the rest of her world. She was warm and funny, and a little sad in the way people get when they grow up rich and lonely. We talked for 3 hours that first night, in a corner, ignoring the whole gala. She had no idea what I did or what I had, and it was the first time in years a woman had looked at me like a person instead of a portfolio. We fell in love the real way, the slow way. And when we married 2 years ago, I did something that, in hindsight, set this whole story in motion. I didn't tell her family what I was worth. Not to deceive anyone. It was simpler than that. The first time I met the Whitfields, they made a series of very fast, very confident assumptions about me. The modest car, the plain jacket, the fact that I'd never heard of the vineyard they were all so excited about. And they decided within about 10 minutes that Rebecca had brought home a nobody. I watched it happen across a dinner table. I watched Grayson's eyes do the math on my watch and my jacket and file me under not a threat, not worth the effort. And I let him, partly out of amusement, partly because I've learned that the fastest way to see who someone really is to let them believe there's nothing in it for them. So I play the part. Quiet Daniel does something in manufacturing, drives that sad little car. I let the Whitfields cast me as the broke outsider who'd landed a rich girl, and they ran with it further than I ever imagined they would. Rebecca knew the truth, of course, Mostly, she knew I was comfortable, successful, that money was never a worry. Even she didn't fully know the scale of it. Like my own habits, I keep it quiet, but she knew enough to know her family had me completely wrong. And early on, she wanted to correct them. She wanted to march in and tell her snobbish father exactly who he was sneering at. I asked her not to. I told her something I believed then and believe now. Never hand people the truth to stop them mistreating you. Let them mistreat you, and let the truth arrive on its own when it costs them something. A person who's kind to you only once they know you're rich was never kind. They were just investing. I wanted to know who the Whitfields really were before they knew who I really was. Rebecca, God love her, thought I was a little crazy, but she trusted me, and she went along with it. But Daniel, she said to me once, early on, after a particularly brutal dinner where her father had spent the evening making me the punchline, doesn't it bother you? Just sitting there and taking it. And I told her the truth. I said, it doesn't bother me because I know something they don't, and there's a strange kind of peace in that. A man they can't actually hurt is a man they can't actually reach. Let them swing. They're only hitting the person they invented. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she said the thing that made me sure I'd marry the right person. She said, you know what's sad? If they'd just been kind to you, they'd never have to find out how wrong they were. Their meanness is the only thing that's going to cost them. She understood it before I did. Kindness would have cost the Whitfields nothing and protected them from everything. Their contempt was the whole bill. So for 2 years, I was the family charity case. And I learned exactly who they were. Let me tell you about the patriarch. Rebecca's father, Grayson Whitfield. Grayson is a man who inherited a fortune and has spent his whole life terrified someone will figure out he never made one. He runs the family business, which mostly runs on the momentum of money made by his grandfather, and he presides over holiday dinners like a king granting audiences. From the day I married his daughter, Grayson treated me with a contempt so total it was almost impressive. He'd introduce me to guests as Rebecca's husband. He's in, manufacturing, with a little wince, the way you'd mention a medical condition. He'd make loud comments about prenups and protecting assets and people who marry up. He never once asked me a single question about my life, my work, my anything, because he'd already decided there was nothing they're worth knowing. That last part is the thing I want you to sit with, because it's the whole key to the man. In 2 years, Grayson Whitfield never asked me one genuine question. Not one. Not what my company made, not how I'd built it, not what I thought about anything. To ask a question is to admit the other person might know something you don't, and Grayson could not afford that, because his entire self was a performance of a man who already had everything and already knew everything. Curiosity is a thing you can only afford when you're secure. Grayson wasn't secure about anything, least of all money, so he made a fortress out of contempt instead. And a man who never asks questions is a man who can be sitting 3 feet from the answer for 2 years and never see it. I was the answer to every problem he had. He just could never bring himself to ask. And the rest of the family took their cues from him. Rebecca's brother, Preston, a man who has never worked a real day in his life, liked to needle me about money in front of everyone. How's business, Danny? Things tight this quarter. With a smirk. Rebecca's mother would send us home from holidays with leftovers because I know how it can be. They built an entire shared fiction in which I was a barely employed opportunist who tricked their precious Rebecca, and they nurtured it, and they enjoyed it for 2 solid years. I'll give you a taste of it, so you understand what I sat through. One Christmas, Preston gave everyone at the table an envelope. Cash gifts, a Whitfield tradition, a way of demonstrating who could give what. When it came to me, he handed me a gift card to a hardware store, so you can pick up whatever you need for those little projects, and winked, and the table chuckled. Another time, at a birthday dinner, Grayson spent 20 minutes advising a nephew on investing, then turned to me and said, "Of course, none of this applies to you, Daniel. You've got to have money before you can invest it," and everyone laughed like it was the wittiest thing they'd ever heard. I had, that same week, closed a deal worth more than Grayson's entire estate. I smiled and said, "Good point, Grayson," and passed the potatoes. I said nothing. I smiled, I passed the potatoes, and I watched. And what I watched, underneath the performance of wealth, was a family quietly coming apart at the seams. If you're still with me, do me that kindness and tap subscribe, because now I have to tell you the part the Whitfields were hiding under all that contempt, and it's the reason the Postnup came out at all. Here's what I figured out, slowly, over those 2 years of being the family embarrassment. The Whitfields were in trouble. Real trouble. The kind that a very old name and a very big house can hide for a long time, but not forever. Grayson had been running the inherited fortune into the ground for a decade. Bad investments, a lifestyle that vastly outran the actual returns, the slow bleed of a family that spends like the money is still being made when it hasn't been made in 2 generations. Preston had a business that was really just an allowance with letterhead. They were asset-rich and cash-poor and sliding, and every holiday I watched the cracks get a little wider. The house needing repairs that didn't happen, the restructuring conversations that stopped when I walked in, the particular tightness that comes over rich people when the money starts making noise. I noticed the things a man in my business notices. The wine at dinner had quietly gotten cheaper, though the bottles were still decanted like they hadn't. The staff that used to serve those dinners had become, we gave them the night off. Grayson took a phone call in the next room one Thanksgiving, and I heard just enough, the tone, not the words, the specific pleading tone of a man talking to a bank, to know exactly what I was hearing, because I've heard it across enough negotiating tables to know the sound of someone running out of runway. These people had spent so long performing wealth for each other that they kept performing it even as it drained away, right up until they were mostly performing it on credit. They were, in other words, exactly what they decided I was. Broke people performing wealth. They just had a much bigger stage to perform it on. And that's the context you need for the dinner. Because about 6 months ago, the Whitfield situation apparently got serious enough that Grayson decided he needed to protect the family. And in his mind, the threat to the family fortune wasn't his own 30 years of mismanagement. The threat was me, the broke son-in-law, the gold digger. He'd convinced himself that the danger to the Whitfield money was that Rebecca's nobody husband might someday get his hands on it. Never grasping, of course, that there was less and less of it to get his hands on, and that the one genuinely solvent person in the entire family was the man he'd been sneering at across the turkey for 2 years. There's something almost tragic in it when you step back. A man watches his family's fortune drain away, year after year, and rather than face the one true cause, himself, he goes looking for a villain he can live with. And the villain he picked was the only person at his table who could actually have saved him. That's the cost of contempt, right there in a sentence. It points you at the wrong enemy at the exact moment you most need to see clearly. Grayson spent 6 months and a lawyer's fee building a wall to keep his money safe from me. He should have been building a bridge. So Grayson had his lawyer draw up a postnuptial agreement, a document that would, in the event of a divorce, wall off the Whitfield family assets entirely from me. Makes sense if you believe I'm a predator, and, in the fine print, do a few other things heavily in the family's favor regarding Rebecca's and my shared finances. And he decided he wasn't going to present it privately, like a decent person. He was going to do it at a family dinner, in front of everyone, because for Grayson, humiliating me was at least half the point. He wanted the whole family to watch the gold digger get put in his place. He didn't know he was about to hand a loaded document to the one man at the table who reads contracts for a living. The dinner was a big one. 12 people, the good china, Grayson at the head of the table like always. I remember Rebecca squeezing my hand under the table on the drive over because she'd sensed something was coming. Her mother had been strange on the phone all week. And near the end, over dessert, Grayson tapped his glass and the table went quiet, and he produced the stapled document from a folder he'd had waiting beside his chair the whole meal. He slid it down the table toward me with 2 fingers like it was something distasteful. Daniel, he said, in his audience voice, the one he used for toasts and for putting people in their place. The family has been discussing this, and we think it's time we formalize some things. This is a postnuptial agreement. It protects the Whitfield family assets from, well, let's be direct. He paused, savoring it, making sure every eye was on me. We all know you married Rebecca for the money. This just makes sure people like you can't take what isn't theirs. He smiled his cold smile. Sign it, son. Prove me wrong, if you can. I want you to picture the table in that moment. Preston, smirking, phone half out to film it for whatever group chat these people have. Rebecca's mother, looking down her plate, unable to watch. The extended relatives, leaning in for the show, delighted, because there's nothing a certain kind of rich family loves more than watching someone beneath them get put in their place. And Rebecca, my Rebecca, starting to stand up, her face white, her voice already breaking as she started to say, "Dad, you have no idea what you're..." And I put my hand gently on her arm, and I looked at her, and I gave the smallest shake of my head. "Not yet. Trust me." And she saw something in my face, that calm, and she sat back down, and she trusted me one more time. And then I picked up the pen. Now, here's the thing about being handed a legal document by someone who wants to humiliate you. They expect you to either refuse and prove you're a schemer or sign in trembling shame. They did not expect you to read it. But I read every contract that's ever put in front of me. It's a reflex 25 years deep. So I read this one, right there at the table, slowly, while 11 people waited for me to squirm. And as I read, two things became very clear, and I had to work hard not to laugh. The first was that this document, which Grayson thought was a weapon, was almost entirely toothless against me, because it was built to protect the Whitfield assets from a poor man trying to take them. It said nothing meaningful about protecting my assets, because it never once occurred to anyone that I had any. In their certainty that I was the broke one, they drafted a document that walled off their shrinking money and left mine, the real money, the substantial money, completely untouched and entirely mine. Read plainly, the agreement said, in effect, that whatever the Whitfields had stayed with the Whitfields and whatever I had stayed with me. They thought they were fencing off a treasure from a thief. What they'd actually done was fence my far larger treasure off from a family that was about to need it very badly. They'd handed me a contract that, in trying to protect them from me, protected me from them. It was functionally the best possible agreement I could have signed. I couldn't have drafted a better one myself, and I've drafted a lot of them. And the second thing, the detail that still makes me smile, was in the recitals and the signature block. Grayson's expensive lawyer had drafted the whole thing off the family's assumptions, and somewhere in that chain of assumption, they'd gotten the most basic facts wrong. They described me, in writing, in a legal instrument, as a person of limited independent means. They'd never pulled my company filings, never checked my actual net worth, never confirmed a single fact about the man they were contracting with. They'd taken their fantasy of me, the broke gold digger, and written it directly into a legal document as established fact, and Grayson had paid a lawyer good money to notarize a lie he didn't know was a lie. They never checked my name, never once looked up what was actually attached to it, what I owned, what I'd built. If this document had ever seen the inside of a courtroom, it wouldn't have been a weapon against me. It would have been a signed, witnessed monument to their own negligence, an agreement built entirely on a version of me that did not exist. So I signed it, with a real, warm, genuine smile, because it was honestly one of the funniest moments of my life. I signed the document that protected my fortune, based on their certainty that I didn't have one. I clicked the pen, I signed my name in full, I even dated it neatly, and I slid it back down the table to Grayson, and I said, "Thank you, Grayson. Really, that means a lot." The table didn't know what to do with that. They'd set the stage for a humiliation. The squirming gold digger, cornered, either refusing and exposing himself or signing in shame. And instead the gold digger had read it carefully, signed it happily, and thanked the host with what looked a lot like genuine warmth. Preston lowered his phone, visibly disappointed. There was no clip here worth sending anyone. Rebecca's mother looked confused. And Grayson had that flicker that a certain kind of man gets when the room doesn't react the way he scripted it, when the applause he'd cued doesn't come. He'd wanted to watch me squirm, and he'd gotten a man thanking him for a gift. He covered it fast, made some joke, move the evening along. And they all went to bed that night believing they'd won, believing they'd finally put the gold digger in his place. They had no idea they'd just handed me, gift-wrapped and witnessed by 12 people, the cleanest possible legal wall between my fortune and their sinking ship. Rebecca gripped my hand under the table the whole drive home, And the second we were out of that driveway, she looked at me and started to laugh, and she couldn't stop, and neither could I. Now let me tell you how the truth finally came out, because the truth always does. I didn't reveal anything that night. I let them have their victory dinner. But over the next few months, the Whitfields' financial situation went from quietly bad to loudly catastrophic. The house went up for sale. Preston's business folded, and Grayson, cornered, did the thing that desperate proud men always do at the end. He started carefully, humiliatingly, reaching out to family for help. First the cousins, then the old friends. Then I imagine anyone who'd take his call. And one by one, I gather they said no, or gave a little and backed away, the way people do when a sinking man reaches for them, because nobody wants to be pulled under too. And eventually, inevitably, running low on options and lower on pride, he came to the one relative he'd never have chosen in a million years. His gold digger son-in-law. And the reason he even knew to come to me, the reason he learned the truth at all, is a detail I still find perfect. It came from a stranger, a mutual business contact, someone who did real work in the real world and had no idea about the family theater, mentioned it to Grayson at some event as a passing, stunned aside. He said, "Grayson, I didn't realize your daughter married Daniel Cross. Do you have any idea what Cross Components is worth? Your son-in-law is one of the wealthiest men in this state." I would have paid money to see Grayson's face in that moment. 2 years of contempt, and he learned the truth not from me, not from Rebecca, but from a stranger at a party in the space of one sentence, while his own fortune was disappearing out from under him. I will never forget Grayson's face when he came to my office. Not Rebecca's in my home. My office and my company, a building with my name on it, filled with 300 employees that he'd never once bothered to learn existed. I watched him come through the glass doors and give his name to my receptionist, expecting, I think, some modest little operation, and I watched him take in the lobby, the scale of it, the awards on the wall, the busy people, the name of the company he was about to realize was mine. I let him wait a few minutes. Then I had him brought up. He walked into my office, and he saw me behind the desk, and I watched 2 years of contempt curdle into something I can only describe as horror, in real time, feature by feature. The broke gold digger was, in fact, worth more than the entire Whitfield fortune had ever been at its peak. And he'd been sneering at me across a dinner table for 2 years. And he'd handed me a Postnup to protect his money from mine. And I'd signed it, smiling, and thanked him. And now here he was, standing in the lobby of everything he'd assumed I didn't have, with his hat, quite literally, in his hands. He didn't even know how to begin. His mouth opened and closed. This proud, performing man, who'd never in his life had to ask anyone for anything, who'd built his whole identity on being the one who granted the favors and never needed them. Utterly unmade, standing in front of the son-in-law he'd spent 2 years humiliating. So I helped him, because I'm not cruel, whatever else I am. I said, "Sit down, Grayson. I know why you're here. Here's the part that matters, though, and it's the part one actually care about. Because what I did next wasn't about revenge. I'd had my revenge, quietly, the night I signed his document. This was about something else. I thought about Rebecca, my wife who'd grown up in that cold, performing, contemptuous family and had somehow come out of it warm, who'd wanted to defend me at every dinner and let me stop her, out of trust, who loved her awful father anyway, the way children do, even the ones who deserve better. And I made a decision that surprised even me. So I helped them. Not Grayson. I want to be clear. I didn't hand Grayson Whitfield a check to keep running a fortune into the ground and sneering at people. But I sat down with Rebecca, and we decided together, and we made sure her mother would be okay. We made sure the family didn't end up on the street. I quietly took on the one asset worth saving. I bought the family house at a fair price that gave them the cash they desperately needed, so it stayed in the family and Rebecca's mother could live out her years in the home she loved, the home Rebecca grew up in. I thought hard about whether that was the right call, and Rebecca and I talked about it for weeks. Because there's a version of this where I do nothing and let the whole performance collapse under its own weight, and every cruel thing that family ever did comes due at once. Part of me wanted that. I won't pretend otherwise. But every time I pictured it, I pictured Rebecca's mother, who'd never been the cruel one, just weak, just quiet at the wrong moments, losing the only home she'd ever known in her 70s. And I pictured my wife having to watch it. And I found that I didn't have it in me to buy my satisfaction with their suffering, because the person who'd pay the highest emotional price wasn't Grayson. It was the woman I married. So I did it for her. And I did it on one condition, which I delivered to Grayson personally in my office in a quiet voice. I told him, "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for your daughter, who is a better person than this family had any right to produce. You're going to be decent to her for the rest of your life. You're going to stop performing and stop sneering and start being someone she can actually be proud of. And you are never, ever going to make anyone at your table feel the way you try to make me feel. Because I promise you, Grayson, you never know who's sitting quietly at the other end, letting you believe whatever you need to believe." He agreed. Of course he agreed. A humble man agrees to everything. He sat in my office, this man who'd handed me a Postnup at his own dinner table, and he cried a little, and he said he was sorry, and I think in that moment he even meant it, though I've learned that sorry from a cornered man and sorry from a changed man look identical for about the first year, and only time tells them apart. Whether it's stuck, whether a man like Grayson can actually rebuild himself at 65, is a different question, and honestly, I don't fully know the answer. Some days Rebecca thinks he's genuinely different. Some days she's not so sure. But I know Rebecca has her mother's home secured. I know her father can no longer look down on me, because you can't look down on a man from the bottom of the hole he's standing in. And I know that the meanest, most status-obsessed family I've ever met got taught the one lesson their money had insulated them from their whole lives, that you cannot tell what a person is worth by looking at them. And God help you if you build your whole judgment of someone on the assumption that they're beneath you. I spent 25 years being quiet about what I'd built, and I'll leave you with the truest thing it taught me. The people most obsessed with who has the money are almost always the people quietly running out of it. Real security doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't sneer, it doesn't perform, it doesn't hand people Postnups at dinner to feel large. The man who has to show you he's the provider usually isn't. And the quiet one at the far end of the table, in the plain jacket, letting you say whatever you like about him, you should be a great deal more careful about him than you are. Not because he'll take his revenge, but because he doesn't need anything from you. And there is nothing on this earth harder to manipulate than a man who doesn't need what you're pretending to have. I think that's what really enraged Grayson, in the end, more than the money, more than being wrong. It was that he'd spent 2 years trying to make me feel small, and none of it had landed, because you cannot shrink a man who isn't reaching for anything you're holding. All his contempt, all his little cruelties have been arrows fired at a man who simply wasn't standing where Grayson thought he was. That's the quiet man's secret, and it's the only one worth having. Get yourself to a place where you need nothing from the people who'd like to own you, and they lose every weapon they have in the same instant. It isn't the money that frees you. It's not needing to prove it. They call me a broke gold digger. They handed me a document to protect their money from mine. They never checked my name. And I signed it smiling because that signature protected everything I'd built from everything they were about to lose. So here's my question, and I mean it because Rebecca and I still talk about it. I helped a family that spent 2 years humiliating me, saved their home, secured her mother, when I could have simply let them fall and watched. Was that grace and the right thing to do for the woman I love? Or did I just teach a cruel, arrogant man that there are no real consequences for how he treats people, as long as there's a quiet, rich son-in-law around to catch him? Tell me down in the comments. I made my choice for Rebecca, but I still wonder if it was the right one for everyone else who will ever sit at Grayson's table. If this story meant something to you, do me that kindness. Subscribe, hit like, and the next time you're tempted to size someone up by their car or their jacket or their quiet, don't. You have no idea whose name is on what. And the ones who never tell you are almost always the ones worth knowing. I'll see you next time.